here's a weird confession right off the bat. The Powerpuff Girls movie was actually my introduction to the Powerpuff Girls. Not the show, the movie. Which is funny because the show had already been on the air for 4 years at that point. But because the movie is an origin story, kid me just assumed the movie came out first and the show came later. In my head, it was basically the same situation as Jimmy Neutron, where the movie launched the franchise and the show followed afterward. Of course, that's not what actually happened, but when you're a kid and you see a movie explaining how the characters got their powers, it just makes sense to assume that's where the story started. And honestly, looking back at it now, I completely understand why Warner Brothers decided to give this movie a theatrical release instead of just making it a TV special. Back in the early 2000s, the Powerpuff Girls was one of Cartoon Network's biggest hits. The show premiered in 1998 and very quickly became one of the network's flagship series. The characters were everywhere: merchandise, toys, backpacks, lunchboxes, you name it. So from a business perspective, making a theatrical movie seemed like a safe bet. Warner Brothers needed a family movie for the 4th of July weekend in 2002, and the Powerpuff Girls had the popularity to potentially bring in a big audience. But despite the popularity of the show, the movie actually underperformed at the box office. The film had a budget of about $11 million, which would be roughly $20 million in today's money, and it only made about $16 million worldwide. And adjusted for inflation, that's around $28 million today. Now, technically that means it probably made some money, but that number doesn't include the marketing costs, theater cuts, distribution expenses, all the stuff that goes into releasing the movie. Once you factor all that in, the movie likely only made around $8 million, maybe even less. That's probably why Cartoon Network didn't try another theatrical movie for 16 years until the Teen Titans Go movie in 2018. The movie also only has a 64% on Rotten Tomatoes, which is technically a fresh, but it's not exactly glowing praise either. So the big question is, why did this movie struggle financially despite being based on such a popular show? My theory is there were a few factors working against it, and the biggest one is probably the runtime. The movie is barely over an hour, including the credits, and once you remove the credits, the actual story is somewhere around 70 minutes. Now, that's not unheard of for animated films, but in theaters it can make the movie feel more like an extended TV special rather than a full cinematic experience. And visually, the movie looks almost identical to the TV show, which is not a bad thing, it still looks great, but from a marketing standpoint, it might have made parents wonder why they should pay theater prices for something that looks the same for their kids that they can watch on Cartoon Network. Another possible factor is that the movie is an origin story. If you're already a fan of the show, you already know who Blossom, Bubbles, Buttercup, and Mojo Jojo were, so the idea of going to the theater to see how they got their powers might not have felt essential. And if you weren't already watching Cartoon Network, you might not have had enough familiarity with the characters to feel motivated to see the movie in the first place. So the movie ended up stuck in this weird middle ground where the fans didn't necessarily need it, and the general audience didn't necessarily know it. Which is a shame, because the movie itself is actually really good. For a movie based on a cartoon show, the writing is surprisingly solid. Since this is an origin story, we get to see how the girls were created by Professor Utona when he accidentally mixed chemical X into his formula of sugar, spice, and everything nice. Right away, the movie establishes the personalities of the three girls really well. Blossom is the confident one. She's the natural leader of the group and tends to approach problems logically. Bubbles is the sweet and sensitive one. She's bubbly, literally and figuratively, and tends to see the good in everyone. And Buttercup is the tough one. She's aggressive, competitive, and always ready to throw a punch. The movie even explains how they got their names. Blossom is named that because she's optimistic and bright. Bubbles is named for her bubbly personality. And Buttercup, well, she got her name just because it also starts with B. That is such an unintentionally brutal joke that it becomes hilarious. I was basically like, well, I guess it starts with B. I guess that fits. Sorry, Buttercup, your name doesn't actually have a special meaning, so that's just so mean, but also so funny at the same time. But what the movie does really well is showing how the girls struggle with their powers at first. They're little kids. They don't fully understand the consequences of their actions. When they try to help people, they end up accidentally causing massive destruction against the city of Townsville. Cars get smashed, building gets damaged, the whole place turns into chaos. And because of that, the citizens of Townsville start to see the girls as more of a threat than they do heroes. That's actually a surprisingly mature idea for a kids' movie. It raises the question of whether having superpowers automatically makes someone a hero. Meanwhile, we also get the origin of Mojo Jojo. And he's already hilarious in the TV show, but this movie also gives him more time to shine. His entire personality is built around these ridiculously long speeches where he repeats himself over and over again while adding unnecessary explanations. And there's one moment in particular where Mojo's army of monkeys starts arguing about who should be the ruler once their plan succeeds. I am not exaggerating when I say that I laughed at that scene so hard that I had to rewind it 5 or 6 times just to catch all the jokes and dialogue I missed while I was laughing. The humor in this movie is genuinely great. It works for kids because of the slapstick cartoon chaos, but there are also plenty of jokes aimed at the older audiences and parents. And the action is also really fun. The fights are fast, frantic, and full of energy. The girls are constantly flying through the air, smashing robots, punching monsters, and zooming around Townsville at lightning speed. Gendy Tartovsky's style of animation works perfectly for this kind of action. Everything feels exaggerated and dynamic, almost like watching a cartoon come to life. And at the same time, the movie never forgets that the characters are still kids. They make mistakes, they feel hurt when people reject them, they struggle with the responsibility of having powers they don't fully understand yet. It came out a few weeks after Spider-Man, why is that so familiar? And the emotional core is ultimately what makes the story work. By the end of the movie, the girls learn the main heroes isn't about showing off their powers, it's about using them to help people, which leads into the events of the TV show where they officially become the protectors of Townsville. Looking back on it now, the Powerpuff Girls movie feels like a really solid adaptation of the show. It captured everything that made the series fun: the humor, the action, the colorful animation, and the surprisingly heartfelt moments. It may not feel like a huge cinematic event, but it absolutely feels like a great Powerpuff Girls story. And honestly, I think time has been kinder to this movie than its original box office results. Because if you grew up watching the show, or you're just a fan of classic Cartoon Network animation, this movie is definitely worth checking out. At the end of the day, the Powerpuff Girls movie is exactly what it promises to be: a colorful, chaotic, and surprisingly heartfelt superhero story filled with sugar, spice, and everything nice, with just a dash of cartoon destruction. For that, I'm giving the movie an A-, a 9 out of 10, and 4 out of 5 stars.